My name is Erin. I'm 29 years old. The server room always smelled like cold metal and bad coffee. The hum of processors was steady and low, almost human in rhythm. If you stayed long enough, you could feel it through your shoes, that mechanical heartbeat pulsing beneath the floor. The air never felt warm there. It was crisp, filtered, sterilized. Every breath tasted faintly of dust and static. It was the kind of place that never slept, that recorded every secret without judgment. I wasn't supposed to be there that late, but I had a feeling. That Tuesday had carried the wrong kind of silence. A missing post-it from my monitor, a folder that suddenly appeared at the bottom of my desktop, opened once, then gone. The kind of micro disturbances that make your stomach tighten even when your mind insists you're overthinking. In the meeting that morning, someone had joked about version control, a casual jab thrown across the table like a dart that didn't quite miss. I'd laughed because that's what you do when you're the only woman in a room full of men who think humor is a currency of dominance. And then there was Jordan. His eyes had lingered too long on my laptop during lunch. That look that pretends to be curious but carries something sharper underneath. He leaned against the counter, coffee cup in hand, pretending not to watch me close my screen. "You're putting all your eggs in that folder, huh?" he said. "It's called a launch plan," I replied, not looking up. "Not an egg hunt." He laughed, that shallow, performative sound people use when they want others to join in, but no one does. The undertone wasn't friendly. It was evaluation, the kind you can feel on your skin. We both worked on the same product team at a mid-sized but fast-growing tech firm in Des Moines, the kind of place that pretended to be a startup, beanbags and kombucha, but underneath, it was a competition arena disguised as collaboration. Every idea had to come with teeth. Every success came with enemies. For 3 months, Jordan and I had been in silent war over the same goal, the AI workplace assistant prototype, two competing visions, one future contract. My design had just cleared final review. His hadn't even passed stage 2. That night, I stayed behind, telling everyone I had a last-minute update to push before morning. No one questioned it. Programmers are nocturnal by reputation. Staying late meant ambition, not suspicion. By 11:42 p.m., the building had gone quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every mechanical sound. Vents sighing, lights buzzing faintly overhead, elevator cables humming in the distance. Then, under the narrow slit of the server room door, I saw it. A thin blade of light shifting, shadows moving across the floor. I froze. Someone was inside. I didn't go in. I waited. The glass panel in the door was small, almost decorative, but it gave me just enough. Through it, I saw him. Jordan. His gray hoodie was zipped up to his neck, the hood drawn just enough to cast a shadow over his face. His reflection glimmered faintly on the steel cabinet doors, focused, calm, surgical. The kind of stillness that doesn't belong to someone improvising, it belonged to someone rehearsed. He was deleting. Deliberate movements, no hesitation, folders dragged to the trash, confirmation clicks, one after another, lines of code vanishing on the monitor like disappearing breaths. I didn't move, didn't even blink, because I didn't have to. I already had what I needed. The tiny red light above the cabinet blinked steadily, the camera I'd installed a week earlier. I hadn't told anyone. Not because I didn't trust the company, because I didn't trust him. That camera was silent, almost invisible against the frame. It watched everything, every keystroke, every deletion, every line of his betrayal. At 12:03 a.m., he closed the terminal, exhaled through his nose, and rolled his shoulders like an athlete cooling down. He looked proud, like a thief who thought the crime was art. He left the room without looking back, the faint echo of his sneakers fading down the hall. I waited 10 more minutes. When I entered, the cold hit me immediately. The air had that metallic tang that reminded me of coin trays in hospital corridors. The fans kept spinning, steady as ever, indifferent to what had just happened inside their hum. The monitor still glowed softly in standby. I tapped the mouse. My folder, gone. Scripts, deleted, log files, scrubbed halfway. He'd done his homework. He knew how to erase footprints. Almost. Because what he didn't know was that my system had been mirroring everything to a private cloud for weeks, an automatic sync every 6 hours. A quiet insurance policy I built after watching too many men in too many meetings take credit for other people's work. I'd learned to prepare for theft the way others prepared for deadlines. And jealousy? Jealousy has a scent. It's the mix of insecurity and entitlement, sharp as burnt coffee. I'd smelled it on Jordan since September. Every compliment he gave me came wrapped in resentment. Every nice work was an audit. By the time I left the server room, the city lights outside were dimming toward morning. I walked out to the parking lot, exhaled into the cold, and told myself not to feel anything. Feeling made things messy. Precision required quiet. The next morning, 8:55 a.m., I walked into the office with a coffee in one hand and a small black USB in the other. My steps were measured. Everyone else was already in the boardroom, half-eaten bagels, phones on the table, idle laughter echoing against glass walls, the kind of laughter that disappears when truth walks in. Jordan looked up first. "Hey, Aaron," he said, as if he hadn't spent the night dismantling months of my work. "Everything okay? You looked stressed yesterday." "I slept like a baby," he smirked. Arrogance, his most consistent feature. He thought he'd already won. That was his first mistake. At 9:03, our manager connected the display to the shared drive. The big screen lit up with the company logo, then the familiar folder directory. I watched her brows knit together. "Aaron," she said, "this isn't your folder." "No," I answered. "It isn't." Across the table, Jordan leaned back in his chair, pretending to sip his coffee, eyes flicking between me and the screen like a spectator watching a slow-motion car crash he'd orchestrated himself. "Actually," I said, standing up, "there's something I need to show before we begin. It's relevant to today's pitch." I handed the USB to Janet from HR, who was dialed in on the big monitor from her office upstairs. She nodded once. We'd spoken the night before. The USB wasn't for proof. It was for impact. A moment later, the display flickered. The company logo vanished, replaced by grayscale footage. Timestamp 12:01 a.m. The server room appeared, cold, sterile, silent. And then, him. Jordan, no mask, no hesitation. His hands, his posture, his profile perfectly visible. Dragging my files into oblivion, executing commands like a man cleaning his own trail. For a second, no one said a word. The only sound was the hum of the projector. "Wait, what is this?" Jordan stammered. This is insane." "Quiet," the manager said softly. The footage continued. The timestamp matched my system logs to the minute. The camera caught the exact keystrokes that mirrored his login. It was clinical, perfectly damning. When the video ended, the next file loaded automatically, a list of terminal actions line by line. Everyone tied to his employee ID. Janet's voice came through the speaker, calm and even. "Jordan, please come with me." He stood, eyes darting between faces, searching for one that might offer rescue. "This is a setup," he said, louder now. "She's framing me. You're seriously buying this?" "No one's buying anything," I said quietly. "We're just watching." The chair scraped harshly as he pushed back from the table. No one looked at him. They were all looking at me, not in shock, not even in pity. Something else. Recognition. The unspoken understanding that control had just shifted, silently, completely. The room felt heavier, the air thicker. Even the sunlight through the glass seemed muted, filtered through the moment. Jordan hesitated by the door. He wanted to speak again, to reclaim some fraction of authority, but there was nothing left to take. Janet's voice through the speaker was final. "Now, please." He left. The door clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was acknowledgement. Every person in that room had witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Not just the footage, but the preparation behind it. The foresight, the precision. No one laughed. No one breathed too loud. And I sat down, adjusted my notes, and opened my backup presentation from my personal drive. "Shall we begin?" I said. They didn't ask me to speak after that. No one did. The silence that followed was surgical, sharp, sterile, complete. It spread through the boardroom like frost crawling across glass, thin and soundless but impossible to ignore. I could hear the tick of someone's smartwatch, the faint mechanical pulse blending with the distant murmur of the HVAC. The smell of burnt coffee lingered from the table tray. Even the air felt filtered, heavy with the aftertaste of revelation. Jordan's voice had cracked mid-sentence. Just once. That single fracture in tone echoed longer than any argument he could have made. A tremble. Human. Unexpected. I had never heard uncertainty from him before. He'd always spoken like every room owed him attention. But that morning, his words stumbled and broke apart before they could even form. And still, no one looked surprised. It wasn't shock anymore. It was inevitability. Like everyone had quietly known this was coming and had simply been waiting for someone to name it. The glass walls reflected everything. The half-averted gazes, the subtle shifts in posture, reflections of faces caught between discomfort and vindication. Someone tugged at their collar. Someone else bit the inside of their cheek until the color drained from it. The projector hummed faintly, the image of the paused video still glowing in the corner of the screen. HR took him away. He didn't even grab his laptop, just walked out in that stiff, defensive stride, muttering under his breath. "Setup. Lawsuit. Unbelievable." The words hit the walls and slid off them, powerless. I stayed seated, my palms flat on the table, fingers steady. My coffee had gone cold beside me, untouched. I stared at the condensation ring it left on the wood grain and thought about how silence could feel louder than rage. Our manager cleared her throat. "Erin, we can reschedule the presentation if you're not ready?" I looked up. "No, I'm ready." My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to rise above anyone's. The authority came from what had already happened. I wasn't defending anything anymore. I was simply continuing. The files were ready, pulled from the cloud backup at 3 a.m. sharp. I'd verified every checksum, every dependency, every timestamp. The version was clean, untouched by his edits. Better, even. His sabotage had forced me to refine, to strip the excess, to leave only precision. It was poetic in its own way. Destruction polishing what remained. I stood, plugged in my own drive, and waited for the projector to switch inputs. No flourish, no dramatic pause. Just the quiet assurance of control. "This is Project Insight," I said, my tone even. "A workplace AI tool designed not just for productivity, but for accountability." That word, accountability, hung in the room for a second longer than usual. A subtle shift of weight, the shuffle of someone crossing their arms. Jordan used to joke that I marketed guilt. He wasn't wrong. The prototype was built to detect manipulation patterns in communication, tonal shifts, reply delays, wording inconsistencies, subtle behavioral markers. Digital gaslighting, quantified. He had laughed about it once, back when he still thought everything I made was an accessory to his career. "You're building a tattletale app," he'd said. And now, the same system had become the mirror he couldn't escape. The irony didn't need explanation. Everyone saw it. I began speaking. 15 minutes of data, structured and deliberate. No filler words, no nervous pauses. Just results. Charts that spoke for themselves. Graphs that told a story of predictive accuracy. Survey feedback highlighting how micro-deceptions could be traced through workplace communication threads. The more I talked, the quieter the room became. By the time I clicked through the final slide, the only sound was the soft buzz of the ceiling vent. The director leaned forward. His tone left no space for hesitation. "This goes to legal review," he said. "Pending compliance, we green light." That was it. No debate, no deferral, just confirmation. The same table that once argued over pizza budgets, that once laughed when Jordan called me detail-obsessed, now nodded like I'd just handed them a stock tip before the boom. The same voices that once interrupted me now stayed silent until I finished each point. It didn't feel like victory. Not yet, because this wasn't about applause or promotion. It was about memory. I wanted the system to remember what he had tried to erase, to make sure that next time someone decided to sabotage quietly, the framework I'd built would already be waiting, watching. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk. The corridor was oddly still, the kind of quiet that makes you question if the building itself is holding its breath. Screens glowed behind cubicles, but no one spoke. Even the usual playlist from IT, some endless loop of lo-fi beats, had been turned off. Maya, our front-end lead, passed by with her coffee. Her eyes flicked toward mine, hesitant but warm. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired." She hesitated. "Good tired or bad tired?" "The kind where your body's still catching up to your brain." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't pity. It acknowledged. She'd been there. She knew the exhaustion that comes after fighting a quiet war no one else could name. Maya had seen things others pretended not to notice. The times Jordan talked over me during sprint reviews. How he'd reword my lines from a presentation and claim them as his adjustments. The condescending compliments that sounded like mentorship but felt like theft. He thought everyone laughed with him. He never noticed how their laughter stopped a second too early, how their glances shifted away from mine. There were people who knew, people who couldn't speak then, but they saw. And now, they remembered. By Friday, an internal memo went out. Simple header. Personnel update. Jordan's contract terminated. Reason, breach of data integrity and internal sabotage. The wording was precise. Not emotional, not moral, just technical. A statement of fact, stripped of sympathy. Exactly how I preferred it. He posted on LinkedIn the following week. Taking time to reflect, excited for new opportunities. It sat there for days. No comments, no likes, no engagement. Just a hollow paragraph floating in digital white space. The kind of silence that burns harder than criticism. I didn't comment either, didn't gloat, didn't correct. I just watched. Because that's what power feels like when it's real. Not the rush of public victory, not the noise of revenge. Just the quiet certainty that something irreversible has already happened. The Monday after he was gone, everything felt still. Not calm, just emptied. Like the air itself had been vacuum sealed, the usual noise, the low hum of gossip at the espresso machine, the clicking of keyboards that sometimes turned into rhythm, was gone. No whispers from behind cubicle dividers. No half-finished jokes drifting just loud enough for someone to pretend not to hear. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that follows impact, the heavy quiet of aftermath. Buildings remember tension. Walls carry echoes even after the source is gone. The office felt like it was still adjusting to his absence, as if the HVAC itself had to relearn how to breathe without him there. People were polite now, more careful with their words, their eyes, their tones. Not out of guilt, out of recognition. The kind that comes when people realize they'd been standing too close to the fire and somehow walked away without burns. Emails came with full greetings again. "Good morning, Aaron," instead of quick one-liners. Conversations paused when I entered rooms, not from discomfort, but from recalibration. They didn't know what version of me to expect. The quiet one from before? The one who had watched everything, or the one who'd exposed it without raising her voice? My project moved fast after that. Too fast, almost. Compliance reviewed every protocol, line by line. They found nothing wrong. Clean builds, verified logs, mirrored data integrity. Every word of that report was another quiet form of vindication. Marketing reached out next. They wanted to name it. Something sharp, modern, easy to brand. I didn't push back when they settled on insight. The word carried the exact temperature I wanted. Cool, professional, clinical, controlled. Everything I had never been allowed to be before all of this. But I didn't forget. Not for a second. Because while the company had moved on, policies updated, positions filled, I hadn't. Memory doesn't delete on command. It lingers, stored in quiet subfolders of the mind. There was one file Jordan hadn't touched. Not because he missed it, because he didn't know it existed. Months earlier, I'd hidden it under a secondary profile, buried behind an innocuous label, copy temp. It sounded like a temporary cache file, something no one would open unless they were cleaning up space. Inside that folder, I kept my evidence. Screenshots of shared documents before and after his edits. Meeting notes where my bullet points reappeared mysteriously in his slide decks. Email chains where I was CC'd at the end of a conversation that had started with my own idea, forwarded back to me like a stranger's work. I wasn't obsessed. I was tired. Tired of the pattern. Tired of being told to let it go. Tired of pretending that professionalism meant silence. Every time someone said, "Don't make it a thing," it became a thing. Every time I smiled to diffuse tension, it fed the myth that I was fine, that I could endure small cuts indefinitely, so I gathered them. Every small cut, every trace of erosion, and I labeled it what it truly was: documentation. That week, I drafted an email to HR. Subject line: follow-up documentation, pattern of misconduct. Attached, 43 files, all time-stamped, all cross-referenced, the digital equivalent of a timeline, the history of a quiet theft, recorded and undeniable. I didn't expect them to act. Not really, but I wanted it in the system, because sometimes justice isn't about what's done, it's about what's written down where it can't be erased. So that next time someone like Jordan decided to rewrite a woman out of her own work, there would already be a record waiting to contradict him. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a meeting invite. HR. Quick follow-up. Janet's name. The side office near the kitchenette was small enough to make conversation feel confessional. The smell of coffee grounds clung to the air, layered over toner and faint citrus from cleaning spray. The blinds were half closed, letting in slats of morning light that striped across the desk like evidence lines. Janet sat across from me with a folder already open. Her tone was calm, measured. "We reviewed everything. You're very thorough." "I had to be," I said. She nodded, tapping her pen once against the folder before setting it aside. "Legal's opening a separate internal case, just so you know." I met her eyes. "I don't want anything from him. I just wanted it recorded." "It is," she said quietly. "Permanently." Her voice carried weight, not pity, understanding, the kind that comes from repetition, from seeing too many versions of the same story play out, most without evidence, most without closure. Maybe this time it ended differently. When I left the office, the hallway smelled faintly of copier ink and burnt espresso. A few coworkers passed, offering polite nods, the kind that said everything without saying anything. I walked straight through the lobby, out the glass doors, and into the crisp air of late autumn. That night, I drove home along the Des Moines skyline. The streets glowed soft orange under streetlights, the river reflecting the shimmer of passing headlights. The radio played a country song I didn't know, something about distance and forgiveness. I let it fill the silence just loud enough to drown out the sound of my own thoughts. For the first time in weeks, I didn't rehearse what had happened. Didn't replay his face, didn't analyze the reactions of people who hadn't defended me soon enough. I just drove. Window half down, air cool against my skin, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask questions, it just exists. At home, I boiled pasta, let it overcook slightly because I wasn't watching the clock. I poured wine into the tall glass I'd been saving for some occasion that never arrived. I lit a candle, lavender and cedarwood, and watched the flame flicker against the kitchen tile. For the first time, the quiet felt earned. Not the uneasy quiet of the office, but the honest quiet that follows survival. Because even though the battle was over, the war had begun long before any of them noticed. It had started the first time someone took credit for something I built, the first time silence was easier than confrontation, and now, for the first time, it had ended on my terms. The company hosted its quarterly all-hands 3 weeks later. It was one of those events that looked impressive on camera, polished, choreographed, meant to convince everyone watching that the company's pulse was steady and strong. They rented out the downtown event space again, the one wrapped entirely in glass so you could see the Des Moines skyline in every direction. Floor-to-ceiling windows, chrome accents, rows of identical white chairs that reflected the light like they'd been polished just minutes before the doors opened. At the registration desk, someone handed me a lanyard with my name in neat block letters. A branded tote bag followed, filled with pamphlets, a water bottle, and a tiny notepad no one would ever use. The hum of conversation filled the hall, a blend of rehearsed laughter, paper coffee cups clicking against tabletops, heels tapping on the polished floor. I took a seat near the front. First row, center section. I wasn't supposed to speak. My name wasn't on the printed agenda. I was told my presence alone was symbolic, a quiet acknowledgement of the product milestone. I was fine with that. I didn't need the spotlight. I'd already stood under a harsher one. The lights dimmed as the first slide appeared on the twin projector screens. Bold colors, corporate font, the words, Quarterly Innovation Review. The execs rotated through the stage, taking turns narrating metrics and forecasts. Numbers climbed, applause followed. And then, halfway through the presentation, the slide changed again. My name appeared. Insight. Empowering accountability in the modern workplace. Aaron Taylor, lead product architect. For a second, I thought it was a mistake. The sound in the room blurred. The applause, the shuffling papers, even the faint crackle of the microphone. I just stared at my name glowing 10 feet tall on the screen. I didn't stand right away. My palms were damp. Not from fear. From memory. Memory of every meeting where I'd been told I was just lucky to be here. Of the smiles that meant dismissal. Of the moments my own words came back to me under someone else's voice. It wasn't nerves. It was recognition. Recognition of every time I had swallowed something small so someone else could stand taller. But not this time. I rose slowly, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the stage. The carpet muffled my footsteps, but in my head, they sounded louder than the applause. Warm spotlights spilled across the podium, washing the room in gold. Somewhere near the back, through the blur of silhouettes, I caught sight of Maya. She gave a small nod, barely a movement, but I felt it like an anchor. The microphone hissed faintly as I adjusted it. I didn't look at my notes. I didn't need to. Insight wasn't built overnight, I said. My voice was calm, steady. It wasn't built in silence either. It came from patterns, from gaps, from being told that evidence wasn't enough unless someone else said it louder. But accountability doesn't need volume. It needs vision. Then I stopped. Let the words hang. The pause stretched. 3 seconds, maybe 4, but it filled the space better than applause ever could. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. There was a silence that didn't feel empty this time. It felt earned. A listening silence. The kind that meant they finally understood the cost behind what they were celebrating. When I stepped away from the podium, I could feel the shift. People clapped, but not the perfunctory kind. It was softer, slower, almost careful. Hands reached out as I passed. Well done. Impressive work. So proud of you. About time. Each phrase landed like punctuation marks, acknowledgments rather than noise. But one person lingered when the crowd began to thin. A woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, tailored blazer, dark hair pinned back neatly. Her eyes were sharp, analytical, the kind that catalog everything before deciding how to speak. She approached me with deliberate calm. Aaron Taylor? Yes. I'm with legal compliance, she said, offering her hand. Her shake was firm, brief. I watched your footage. I hesitated, unsure which footage she meant, the meeting or the server room. She clarified before I could ask. And your follow-up file trail. I met her gaze. I just did what I had to. Most people don't, she said quietly. They hope it goes away. You made sure it couldn't. For the first time that day, I felt something flicker in my chest. Not pride exactly, but something steadier. Confirmation. She reached into her pocket and handed me a business card. The edges were embossed in silver. Call me, she said. We want to talk about expanding Insight to other branches. East Coast first, then we go national. National. The word echoed in my head like the hum of the projectors, soft but continuous. I nodded, slid the card into my pocket, and thanked her. When the event ended, I didn't stay for the networking hour. The crowd drifted toward the buffet tables, buzzing about stock prices and product demos, their voices echoing off the glass walls. I slipped out through the side exit. The November air hit cold against my face as I walked to the parking structure. The city skyline shimmered beyond the river, light reflecting off glass towers that looked both near and unreachable. I didn't turn on the radio this time. I didn't need sound. I just drove. Headlights gliding over empty streets, dashboard lights soft against the dark. Messages pinged on my phone. Congratulations, emojis, half-written compliments. I didn't answer any of them. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and watched the city blur past, restaurants closing for the night, office windows glowing like fragments of unfinished lives. Because the real revenge isn't the moment he was fired, it isn't the security footage or the stunned silence, or even the corporate statement that followed. It's this quiet drive home, this space that finally feels like mine. The moment his absence creates more room than his presence ever did. I saw him again. Not in person. On a Reddit thread, someone in a tech forum had posted about a brilliant engineer who got caught deleting a colleague's project before launch. No company name, no city. Just enough detail for those who had been there to recognize the story between the lines. A few comments beneath it, some laughing, some angry, some cautious, pretending to be neutral but reading too carefully not to know. I scrolled without meaning to. There it was, one reply that stopped me. Honestly, she should have sued. I stared at it longer than I meant to. My cursor hovered over the comment box, but I didn't type. I just sat there, watching the screen light shift as the morning sun moved across my desk. I took a sip of coffee, felt the warmth fade as it cooled, and closed the tab. Because this was never about lawsuits or headlines. It wasn't about punishment. It was about reclamation. Reclaiming what he tried to erase, my place, my name, my voice. The parts of me that had been slowly overwritten in small ways long before that night in the server room. Back in the office, things looked the same on the surface. Same desks, same clattering. Keyboards, same startup energy buzzing like caffeine in the walls. But something had shifted underneath it. They gave me a corner desk now, a small change, but symbolic. From there, I could see the whole floor, the quiet choreography of ambition and exhaustion. My monitor faced the window, not the hallway. It made the space feel mine. People acted differently too. It wasn't dramatic, just subtle. They stopped interrupting me mid-sentence, stopped softening their tone when explaining something technical, stopped calling my reports too detailed. They listened. And that alone changed everything. Even the interns had started asking questions, not just about the product, but about the unspoken parts of survival, the invisible skill set no one puts on resumes. How to breathe in rooms that tighten when you speak. How to keep your voice steady when someone tries to make you doubt your own competence. One of them, Jules, stopped me one afternoon by the coffee machine. The smell of roasted beans drifted between us, familiar and grounding. Jules looked nervous, like the question had been rehearsed. "Hey, can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said. "How did you stay calm through all that?" I looked at her for a moment. She was maybe 24, bright, sharp, still learning that competence alone doesn't always protect you. "Because," I said quietly, "I wasn't just defending a project. I was defending the version of myself that refused to vanish." Her eyes flickered with understanding. That subtle recognition you only see in someone who's already felt the edges of erasure. She nodded softly. I hope I'd handle it like that. "You will," I said. "Just document everything." We both smiled, small and knowing. Then she left, and I stood there a little longer, letting the hum of the coffee machine fill the quiet. That version of me, the one who refused to vanish, had waited years to show up. She'd stayed quiet through the late nights of reworded slides. She'd watched ideas drift across desks and come back with someone else's initials on the file. She'd kept count of every misunderstanding that cost her credit, every apology she'd made to keep peace. But not anymore. A month later, a company-wide memo arrived. HR policy updates sent to all staff, new protocols, mandatory server access logs for all engineers, daily mirrored backups to a secure cloud, optional security footage access for team leads. No one said my name, but when I opened the draft policy in the shared drive, the metadata told the truth. Initial reviewer, Aaron T. They kept it quiet, of course. Corporate stories always get rewritten before they're published. But I knew that was enough. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It doesn't need to be dramatic or cinematic or shared online for validation. Sometimes it's as quiet as a new rule being enforced, as subtle as a system built to protect the next person who shouldn't have to fight the same battle. It's the unseen reinforcement of boundaries, the quiet correction of culture, the new standard no one mentions but everyone feels. And occasionally, it's the email that lands in your inbox. Subject line, opportunity. A recruiter from another firm. We've heard about how you handled a difficult internal situation. Would you be open to consulting? I read it twice before smiling. The industry always listens, even when it pretends not to. Jordan never apologized. He never would. He'd built his entire identity around being right. But that's the part that stopped mattering. Because I didn't need his guilt anymore. I didn't need the satisfaction of him knowing what he'd lost. The silence that followed his name in conversation said enough. I had something else now. Clarity. Control. A calm that didn't need validation. And when the product launched, my name was printed clean and clear at the bottom of the release banner. Lead Product Architect, Aaron Taylor. It wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. There were no gasps, no headlines, no dramatic retribution. Just a steady rewrite of the story that had once been told without me in it. He thought he'd deleted my work. He just edited himself out of the company. And in the end, the version of me that remained, she didn't need to fight anymore. She just built. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.